All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening to another episode of the CX Chronicles podcast. Super excited. Gaurav, welcome to the show, my friend. Gaurav is the CEO at Involve.ai, super cool company based out in the California area. And he's here today, folks, to share his story around how they've kind of thought about mastering their 4 CX pillars. Plus, super cool story, super cool background. And he's here to share with us today kind of how he got into this whole world. So, Gaurav, why don't you take a couple minutes to say hello to the CX Nation, my friend?
Yeah, hello. Excited to be here and excited to be here with you today and share my story.
So I think number one, we're pumped too, man. You guys have a super cool business that you're building at Involve. Plus, you've got an awesome background, man. Why don't you take the first 2 or 3 minutes? Let's set the stage for today's show. Give the CX Nation a little bit of information about yourself, Gaurav. Give them a sense for who you are, where you came from, and how you got to this place where you're with this incredible opportunity in this position that you're in today, building the team at Involve.ai.
That's a great question. Let me start with a story about myself. I think I was telling you before, but I come from a very humble family in New Delhi. That's where I was born and raised. Actually, just outskirts of New Delhi. Lost my father to cancer when I was 2 years old. Mother was a blue-collar worker. She used to just wash utensils door to door. So I had a very poor upbringing. However, my older brother got into video games when I was younger. He's 7 years older to me. He loved playing video games. They got me really fascinated, and I started to learn how to code just so I can play and modify games. So that's kind of my early childhood. I started coding when I was 10 years old.
Wow.
Built my first video game at 12, and then in high school, that's when I joined a coding class where I really kind of got into fundamentals of what we're doing today, a lot of data science and machine learning. But more importantly, I met my co-founder in high school, Samya. She's a rock star programmer. We met in a coding class, and we were both nerdy kids. We were fighting for the front desk. So that's how we met. So in hindsight, didn't make either of us cool, but we became friends, and we started our first company together, and it was all around customer centricity, but for doctors and hospitals. So we built a patient experience platform, almost like a Marketo or a HubSpot, but it was for improving patient experience for doctors, individual practitioners, clinics, and hospitals. And right after high school, so we were 16, 17 when we started working on the project, and ran it for about 6.5 years, and had a lot of ups and downs. That was our first company, but had the opportunity to build a great team. We were about 80 people, and sold the business.
And Gaurav, how old were you guys? If you don't mind me asking, how old are you when this went down?
Yeah, 22. I think I was 22.
Wow.
My co-founder was 24. Yeah, we were kids, definitely. But a lot of learning. I think we could have done tons of things better, but had a great opportunity to build something. After I sold the first company, just didn't want to do startups ever again. Didn't want to look at it. It was I always said, it was like I slept like a baby every night. I would wake up every 2 hours and cry and go back to sleep.
It could be a daunting, lonely, painful experience, my friend, building these startups and being a part of just the organized control, chaos, and volatility, right?
Oh, totally. And tons of imposter syndrome. Like I always feel we had all these people who were older than me, and always feel like, hey, everyone could be a better CEO in the company than I am. So having dealt with all of that, I didn't want to do it again. So I ended up joining PwC as a product lead there, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they moved me to New York. They were actually doing a really cool project. I don't think it's live anymore. They scrapped it, but they were building a managed services app, which would take away managed services. They would take away managing consultants, or that was a cool product that I worked on for a couple of years, but then jumped into a startup again. And the way that we started this company, my first idea was very different. And I think your people listening to CX Chronicles will enjoy this, because this shows how startup journeys are very, very convoluted and different, and it's nothing is the same. Our vision was, we're going to build this app that you could volunteer and help the community, but we can pull smart people from multiple places. So as an employee at Google, at Facebook, at a startup, I can come together and work on helping a nonprofit. Yep. And that's kind of what we started. So it's great for the community. It's great for your company. You get to know and meet people in your company and outside and different companies, and you do volunteer work. and it grew like crazy, but we just couldn't figure out how to monetize it, and there was a lack of product market fit. So we ran it for about 4 years, had 450,000 users, a lot of people.
Wow.
We had almost 20,000 users from Microsoft, I think 40,000 from Verizon. It's like big companies, a
Wow.
lot of people were doing it, but we won't see recurring usage. Like people would do it like 2 events or 3 or 4 things online and then stop coming back to the platform. So churn was a big issue for us. And last year, especially when COVID happened, churn just grew for us. Like we were losing 20% month over month churn, and that was a big. People were not coming together, so the business was dying. And for that reason, we built this platform internally, which was a customer intelligence platform, we called it, but it would just take data from our Salesforce account, our usage behavior, and it would just predict churn and upsell opportunities and which users are going to stay, which ones are going to churn. And that was kind of the origin of Involve and how this platform started. So we pivoted almost like Slack, how they were a gaming company and they built a collaboration tool internally. We had a different product. We built something totally different, which felt like a viable business model. So we launched this, and I remember SEM Rush was one of our first customers. Now they're a public company,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
we saw amazing churn improvement for them, and they were able to get some great numbers. So was MC, some of our early adopters, and that's kind of when we had the aha moment that maybe what we built is really valuable. So we launched, and that's kind of how our journey has been. We actually started with a totally different idea and ended up doing this.
But so okay, number one, that's awesome. But it's funny, right, Gaurav? This is common in business, and this is common in the world of entrepreneurialism, starting businesses, trying to find specific market needs, trying to find problems that customers are having again and again and
Yeah.
again, and then coming up with solutions, coming up with technology, coming up with even just process. Sometimes it's process and
Yeah, you're absolutely
framework and
right.
methodology around how to think about the problem, right? And so it's incredible to hear that. But here's the other part: you guys picked a space that is just like it's. I mean, this whole world of customer experience, customer success, customer service has already been top of mind for many leading companies for decades, no doubt about it. But
Yeah.
right now, more than ever, man, especially over these last 2 years of the pandemic, every company on planet Earth is thinking about customer experience, customer success. They're thinking about retention. They're thinking about churn mitigation. They're thinking about really kind of maxing out LTV or increasing the lifetime value of a customer, because we have to, right? The last 2 years showed this entire world how quickly things can change for any business or any business leader. And I think now more than ever, Garth, like we're in this position where like companies are invested in this stuff, they're focused on this stuff, and they're really kind of open to hearing any new idea or tool or service or software or technology or framework that's going to help them really make sure that they double down on that and they continue to grow their business into the future.
I really believe so, and that's kind of what we found as well. You're absolutely right there, because I think, and I'm sure same with your business, right? When every time you start a company or a business, what is it? It's a group of people that come together to build a product or a service for a group of customers, and you stay very close to your customers for till you're 10 people, 20 people, even 100 people. But as soon as you cross that, there's only a few people on the front lines that really know what your customers are saying and doing about your products. But the product team doesn't have a lot of visibility, neither does the sales team, the marketing team. The executive team are probably, I feel, unfortunately, the furthest removed from your
Yeah,
customers,
it's
which
oftentimes
is,
true, man.
yeah. And I think what when we were starting, we were saying, hey, can we take this data, tell a story about your customers, so everybody in the company can really know their customers, and we feel, would that be a good thing? I feel there's so much that can come out of it. You can obviously improve customer experience. You can know what your customers are about to do and be proactive instead of being reactive, be data driven. You can build better product and services because now you know what your customers are saying and doing. And that was kind of the indicators that we use, that irrespective of where the market goes, this would be a good thing. And maybe we can help bring that customer insights to everybody that you already have when you start the business, right? Like the early founders, they know every customer by name. Like reading a podcast by Brian Chesky, Airbnb, he was saying that their founders would go and sleep in their customers'
Yeah,
homes to
yeah,
really figure out
yeah.
the customer experience. And
That's right.
I mean, right, I think that's kind of what we're trying to do for companies like Airbnb, but at scale now.
I think that's so Gaurav, that's awesome. I think you said something that's really important to call out, and I know almost every one of the listeners to this show is thinking about this stuff every day. But one of the fun parts about working at a startup or a scale up or a growth focused company that's charging into the future is we leverage a lot of different pieces of technology. There's a number of different softwares that come into a business, whether it's marketing and sales, whether it's operations, whether it's analytics, whether it's product and development. There's all these different tools, right? There's all these different pieces of software and all these different pieces of technology that allows different SMEs to do different parts of their day-to-day business ownership. What's super cool about the work that you and the team at Involve.ai are doing is most companies struggle to aggregate that data, right? To pull it all together, to bring it into one place where sense can be made from it, insights can be drawn, new trends or themes can be gathered, and you can start to visualize or storytell with some of this data. And let's call it what it is, man. Like, we've both spent a lot of time at these companies in New York City and San Francisco. A lot of times companies can't even think about this stuff until they get to the point of either their life cycle maturation, or to the point of where they have the funds and the resources to go out and get a data scientist, or to go out and get an analyst, or to go out and get a sales ops manager or a CRM expert who can kind of help you begin to make sense of all the stuff that you've collected. And I think it's really, really cool that you guys have, not only did you know that was a huge need and a huge space out there in the world, but you have the super cool tool, the super cool solution, and this super cool methodology that allows people to see a different way or a different path forward. So with that being said, I'd love to jump into the first CX pillar of team, Gaurav. Why don't you spend a couple minutes talking about the team that you've built at Involve.ai? What are some of the different focus areas? What are some of the different teams, some of the different departments that's thinking about this type of space and thinking about this type of work every day for your clients?
Yeah, and we've grown a lot, I think, and that's such a great question. Thinking about the team is so valuable and so important, and something that I do, I just find myself doing a lot, even though I should be doing other things. But I feel we've built just such an excellent team. Some of the core people, and I really believe in hiring smarter people than the founding team. I think it's just so valuable to get diverse backgrounds and people who are hungry, but also people who have been there, done that. So you have a right mix and a balance. And I actually have just thinking about like building high functioning teams. And I made so many mistakes in the past, is trying to either hire completely opposite of me, like hire people who are very different when we did our first company. And at the same time, then firing everybody and then hiring everybody who's exactly like us, because we felt like that's what's successful, and neither worked.
Yeah.
And I feel what works for high functioning teams is really being able to get diverse talent. But the three skill sets we look for, and we have like some core values, everything from collaboration is key, a growth mindset is extremely important, someone who's always a learner, even if you've been in the industry for 2 years out of college or 30 years now. I feel that growth mindset really plays into it. Collaboration, having that humility and people who play nice with each other is so important, because I feel those people who are not confrontational all the time, obviously they're candid and they work with trust and they'll give feedback, but they know how to collaborate is extremely important for us. And people who take ownership, that's kind of some of the softer skill sets we look for, ownership and accountability. And the final piece is intrinsic motivation. Are you internally driven? Are you excited about the space? Are you excited about a product? Are you excited about sales, marketing, or anything that just motivates you, and you wouldn't do it just for the money? Because there's so many ups and downs in a startup. You can obviously get paid more at Amazon or Google or anywhere, like 90% of the other companies in the world. But I think it is important for that. And now some of the hard skills that obviously we look for a lot of engineers. We have, I think, still 60% of our team is engineers, data scientists, machine learning, AI engineers, or full stack developers. So that's a lot of people there. We just started building our go-to-market teams. We hired someone called Mary Poppin, who was the chief customer officer at SuccessFactors. I think she was employee number 40 there, grew it up, acquisition to SAP. And now then she was at Glint, that got acquired by LinkedIn, and LinkedIn got acquired by Microsoft. So hired some exceptional leaders to build in our go-to-market functions. She's our chief customer officer. But that's kind of what we're looking for now, is like building our go-to-market skill set, which is everything from SDRs and sales and marketing, but also then building customer success and customer service teams. But we're still new at that. I think we've done a lot of work with just engineers building stuff, talking to customers, building stuff. I think now we're more maturing as an organization.
That's super cool. I think so. A couple of things you mentioned. Number one is just being in a position of being able to hire other just experts and people that are industry leaders, industry thought leaders, folks that have been at huge companies. They've done amazing things. They've got, here's the other thing. I know I talk about this idea of playbooks constantly on the show, but the reality is phenomenal leaders and executives like Mary, it took them years or decades to build those playbooks. And look, I'm all about young up and coming all-stars who just they're in their 20s and they can build companies that are incredible. They can build teams that are incredible, tools but there's something about spending time with a number of different teams and a number of different businesses in a number of different industries under a variety of circumstances and climates. Because that's the other thing, man. It's like, doing it again and again and again and again. That's no longer luck. That's no longer, oh, that person's just been in the right place. Right? No. That's repeating success, right? And if you can start to get to the point where when you're building your team, you start bringing some of those folks on, they're going to help other people repeat success, and they're going to help other up and coming future leaders understand what types of sacrifice, what types of education, what type of hard work actually goes into building these things before you even get to this idea of companies buying your company or acquisitions or merger. Like before you even get to any of that stuff, like building companies, building teams, this stuff is really, really hard, Gaurav. And it's awesome when you can kind of pad the team or pad the ranks with all sorts of great people. There's one other thing I want to call it real quick that you just mentioned that I love that you talked about, which was this idea of really, really kind of forcing having a diverse unit. You mentioned all these awesome roles. So I'm already jealous because you talked about developers, engineers, data scientists, analysts, all these different folks that can do some serious damage. You and I both know that with any business, because they're the folks that are just so great at bringing data to life, using data to tell stories, and leveraging data to create actionable insights or calls to action for any, whether it's marketing, sales, ops, whatever part of the company, to go do things, right? To go do things that are going to make a big difference. So I love some of the things that you guys are thinking about there. Gaurav, I'd love to spend some time talking about the second CX pillar, tools, because this is an area that, number one, you and your team have a really high technical aptitude, and you're doing some of the stuff that you've built with Involve.ai. It's directly related to leveraging some of these other tools that your customers are using, or some of these pieces of software that the companies have already kind of built on. Can you spend some time kind of, number one, before we even get into some of the cool tools that you guys are using at Involve, I'd love to just kind of selfishly hear, when you started this and when you and the initial team started thinking about what Involve.ai could potentially become, how did you even know which handful of tools or which handful of technologies customers were going to want to engage with you guys on, and we're going to want to hear how you could potentially help them with optimizing or utilizing those tools?
That's awesome. I think it's been an incredible journey trying to figure out. So the first part of the question sounds like you're asking is, what are some of the most common tools that our customers use that we can plug into, get data from, get insights from, right?
How did you even know which tools to focus on, or to start thinking about some of the back end ideas and technology that you knew you guys were going to build?
It's crazy. Well, and you know what happened? And this is so funny. We did almost 400 customer interviews when we were starting, just to kind of figure out product market fit, and kind of like, almost like what you do when you do your podcast, you're asking people, right? So we were trying to do a lot of questions and interviews and really figure out what are the challenges people solve for. And then the only thing we realized, and one of the questions was, what tech stack do you have? Like, what the number of tools do you use? And our assumptions were that the smaller the company, they would use like maybe one or two core systems. The bigger the company, they would use hundreds of tools, right? Or maybe 9 or 10 different ones. And we felt our thesis was, we're going to figure out what the common patterns are, and we're going to build integrations for them. Like we were like almost certain that Salesforce is going to come up,
definitely,
Zendesk, some of the big ones, so we can easily figure out what the top 5 are. And here's what we found out. Number one, a small company, even a small company like an SMB company, sub 5 million in annual revenue, they use an average of 11 systems for their customer data, which includes everything from like Slack. Now people have Slack groups, they have email, obviously, they have Google Calendar, or something like a G Suite,
Yep.
but then you have Salesforce, you have a marketing system like HubSpot, or then you have a customer support software like Zendesk.
Totally.
And then you have like some fancy new tools like for AI or predictive analytics and market intelligence tools like SixSense. There's so much just Crunch-based subscriptions that people have, Zoom Info for prospecting. There's like Outreach.io for email prospecting. There's like so many tools, Monday.com or something like a task manager. So that was an assumption that we had, and we figured out that doesn't work. Then for big companies, what we found out is even there's no commonality. Like the top tools, like Salesforce obviously comes up. That's a big one. Snowflake is another big one for data warehouse for product. But then they have like more intricate systems, and different departments use different systems. So what we really immediately found out is we have to build our tech stack such that it can take data from almost anywhere. So we did a couple of things. There's a really cool platform, and no, they're not paying me, but they're called Fivetran, which is awesome. But what Fivetran does is it helps you to integrate to multiple systems. So we were able to build integrations through them. What would have taken us like a year to build, we were able to build in a month.
Wow.
And we launched 180 plus integrations overnight.
Damn.
So now we can plug into the Salesforce, Zendesk of the world, but also some of the uncommon or up and coming systems like Slack and other systems through them. And it's been a great partnership. So that was the short kind of or long answer to your question. But everyone uses so many different systems, and if you only integrate with one or two and you take data from one or two, then you're not telling the whole story. And what we want to do is tell a complete story about your customer. So we are stack agnostic. We're built in a way that no matter what your data is, wherever it lives, we always joke about this, even if it's under the desk of a developer in Romania, in a server that no one has access to, we'll get it for you. We'll get that data.
It almost sounds like you've seen that story before, my friend.
Yeah, totally. We've seen that story before. For one of our customers, one of the legacy products, they have the senior architect who's in Romania. I'm not going to name them now, but they had this challenge where there was a legacy product where they really wanted to surface some insights from it, and all the data was stored away in a server, because that's how the company started.
That's wild. So wait, Gaurav, a couple of things that I absolutely love that you're calling out. It's funny, inside of our work at CXC, we do something super similar inside of our client working sessions around the tool, their CX or their CS toolkit audit. And essentially something very similar where you go through and you map all the tools. But then once you map all the tools, then we take the next cut and we talk about utilization levels. So then we'll talk about our utilization levels, high, medium, or low. And then the last part, we do the same cut that I heard you just get to, which was pricing. Because a lot of times if you're helping other CX and CS leaders thinking about their budget optimization or thinking about their resource allocation or where are they going to place their valuable chips on these bets, right? Everybody's thinking about their upcoming brand new year budgets, right? Everyone's thinking about how they're going to look like an all-star around maximizing their CX and their CS budget. But you just said the third part, which was the cost, man. It's so common that you look at some of these large companies' teams, they might have 100 CSMs, and you'll identify that there's 20 tools, a third of them are utilized at a low level. And then when you talk about agent familiarity or comfortability using said tool, also low. So then you start to think about, wait a minute, what do we want our agents to be excellent at? Which 3 or 5 tools do we want them to be excellent at? And they know exactly how to use it. Plus the other part too, let's get back to what we're both thinking about every day. That's where you start to get some of this data governance, data cleanliness. Yeah. This is where you begin to have clarity around where to aggregate specific customer activity data sets that are going to become gold for future voice of customer reports or for future customer feedback digest, whatever you guys are building within your companies. But this is huge, man. And it's just a thought for the listener on the tool side, which is if you haven't thought about kind of laying out that cut of the land on your tools, do it immediately. It takes an hour to sit down with your team and understand this stuff. But it's such a great way of understanding what you even have at your fingertips or what you have accessibility to when you're thinking about where's all this data going to come from and how can we storytell with it.
And a lot of our job is just like getting that visibility, getting that data out from silos, see how it interacts with other places, right? How do we connect customer health data with finance data to be able to forecast properly or understand what churn may happen next quarter? How do you get usage data and really forecasted with account names and Salesforce data. So you can see that how companies that have been buying more have been using the product, and is the usage ramping? So there's upsell expansion opportunities. I think that's exactly kind of what we're trying to do, is take the silos away. But I love your idea of data governance and starting this early and creating that infrastructure early, so you have visibility into your customers and on the long term.
Big time, big time. It's an easy way to get started. And the last thing is this: customer journeys, like the specifics of customer journeys, are always changing. They better be changing, right? If you're listening to your customers and you're listening to the market, your business is probably constantly ebbing and flowing and twisting and turning and changing.
Yeah.
And that customer journey changes. But what's interesting about some of the things that you guys are building at Involve is like, there's different ways that you can think about how to understand how data fits into that customer journey. And sometimes, guys, it's going to be, what do we have? What don't we have? What do we need? What don't we need? What data do we have a high level of data confidence in, or a lower level of? To your point, your friend who's hiding his data underneath his desk there in Romania, for example. But there's a number of different ways that you can start to think about this stuff. So, Gaurav, I'd love to use this as a segue to slide into the third CX pillar of process. So we're already kind of hitting on some of this stuff, but I'd love to hear you kind of just talk for a couple minutes about some of the ways that you and the team have thought about just, number one, managing process and managing how to deal with all the changes as the company's grown, the team's grown. You've got all these incredible SMEs doing these different things. Now, what have been some of the big things that you guys have focused on when it comes to keeping your process aligned and continuing to spread that tribal knowledge as Involve has grown?
Yeah, and I think that's so excellent. I think one of the biggest things that we've done that has worked, and maybe I'll start with like things that haven't worked for us. I think we failed a lot in documenting processes. I think one of the things that as a team we really struggled with is knowledge transfer and being able to have repeatability and replicate it. And it's so important for scale, right? You want all your CSMs to be able to have the same kind of conversation that the founders would have. You want your sales reps to be selling the exact same way that the top reps are selling. You want all the marketing messaging to be uniform, and the content marketer writing the same way as a thought leader would write. It's just so it's been extremely hard for us. So we've really struggled with this, and I think it's still a hard challenge for us to document processes. I think as the DNA of our company, or at least the people we've hired and onboarded and who are amazing here, are risk takers. So I think we have hired fewer process builders and more risk takers. and that's it's not always great for repeatability. What has worked for us, which is, obviously there's so many other things that I feel, you know better and other people can guide better. I think what's personally worked for us is having smaller pods works really well. Maybe having cross-functional pods, that's been extremely well. So we always have a player coach and a team lead that has, let's say, 2 or 3 engineers, or 2 engineers, 1 data scientist, 1 customer success manager in there, just thinking out loud. And then when we work with a customer, then that pod works with customers. That pod has 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 customers. And then there's like different pods for everything. And what that has done is there's tremendous knowledge sharing that can happen one-to-one in that pod. And then the team leads are responsible for making sure that the different pods are learning from each other too. I think that's worked really well. Every time we have bigger teams and we have like anyone who has 10 or more people in the company, I think that's when we feel knowledge transfer just stops.
Yep.
And there's like, people don't know, they're not getting trained properly, they're not ramping up properly. So we really maniacally, and I think this is Jeff Bezos' advice, but he talks about two pizza team. I don't know if you.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, that's exactly what we try to follow, is like keep the team sizes short. And it's really hard to do because sometimes you have a great leader who we know that can manage hundreds of people at the same time, but we make sure that their team leads under them and just small pods that everyone's working out of. I think that has worked really well. I really don't know if it can work when we are 10,000 people, but I think that's something that I've seen work well. Also with our customers, our customer teams, when they have pods and they usually have, let's say, a BDR, couple of AEs, account executives who are closing deals.
Yep.
And then they have maybe a content marketer who's working with them. And they have a CSM or implementation expert and we have an account manager to do renewals and upsells and cross sells. When they're working as a pod, everything's working more
Totally.
seamlessly. The
Totally.
challenge happens with churn and with, when you're a big company, you're losing a lot more people, and there's churn of sales reps. So it's like injecting people in and out of the pod is a challenge, but if you can do that, I think that works really well. Even in my last company with PwC, I worked with ASML for some time. That company now is like, I think now it's a Fortune 100 company, but when it started, they did a phenomenal jobs with interjecting pods where there's a sales rep and a marketer and an engineer and a data scientist
Yep.
all working in the same
Yep.
pod.
Yep.
And what that would do is the cross-functional learnings are amazing.
Love that you brought this up, because it is one of the simplest ways that you can not only cross-pollinate, but you just nailed it, Gaurav. It's cross-educate different SMEs and let these different SMEs complement, collaborate, and really, frankly, improve one another's general view in terms of the product or the service or the general offering that you're selling. But the number two, nothing is more helpful than when you are a BDR sitting in a pod like that, or sitting in a voice of customer task force committee like that, and you hear how an analyst thinks about a problem, because you don't get to hear or think about some of that stuff when you're making 100 smiles and dials a day, or when your job is to go find the next 250 potential targets on LinkedIn, or when your job is to be constantly thinking about qualification or disqualification. And to hear a data scientist talk about the way that they think about customer segmentation, or
Exactly.
account valuation, or maybe even activity valuation, meaning like, hey, I don't know, man, mathematically, this type of activity probably yields a higher result because of X. That is like a game changer. The other thing too is this, I'm just going to call it out. That's fun, man. If you want to think about easy ways of maxing out your EX or your employee experience, put smart people around other smart people, and they're going to be they're going to be pretty darn happy, right? They're going to be feeling that collaborative energy, feeling the learning. Totally. Anybody's going to be having fun when they're learning something, man, especially smart people, right? They crave that. Like, they're constantly looking for ways of learning more about life, about business, about the product, the service, or better yet, about doing your job really well. Everybody wants to do great at their job, right? Everybody was. If you don't, you got a different set of problems on your hands. But I love this idea of building a pod. And I think it's another huge takeaway for the listener today, Gaurav, is like, that's easy. Because whether you're a small little scrappy 10-person company with your first 10 accounts, or whether you got your, first 1,000 people on board and you've got 10,000 accounts, like, that's something that's easy to start thinking about as we come across this new year and we start thinking about additional ways that we can really improve our customer experiences and our customer success.
Yeah, love that. Great ideas.
Gaurav, so this one I'm excited about, my friend. I want to slide into the fourth CX pillar of feedback. So this is a huge part of what you guys are doing at Involve.ai, right? You're helping your customers prevent churn. You're helping them think about how they can leverage the existing data sets that they have to be even more insightful and take the right types of actions. But I'd love to hear your story and just some of the experience that you've had building Involve around how you guys have used some of your customer and your employee feedback to grow the business.
Yeah. And it's just so important. I was actually listening to a podcast by this founder called Justin Kan this morning, and he started Twitch, but he talked about feedback, and feedback is so important and so hard to take. And as you grow bigger, I think this is another thing where I've seen that when a company starts and they're really small and you have like 3, 4, 5, 10 people in their room, everyone's so comfortable around each other. They're giving feedback. We're craving feedback from our customers where they're saying, wow, your product really is bad, it's terrible, it doesn't work. And we want that feedback. We want them to tell us that. We want our staff to be able to say, wow, this process is really not working, or we're not great leaders, we got to learn this stuff, or we're not good at fundraising, whatever that might be. There's just so open communication, and it just becomes like, it just goes away when you're at scale, when you're scaling and operating at scale. And I think the reason is, one of the things that I've really failed at doing is try to mimic that same culture as you're scaling up and you're becoming a big team, in my last company and this one, and it doesn't work. And I think what works is, like a lot of these big companies, Google and Facebook, Amazon, and some of the big McKinseys of the world, they work with management consultants to come in and create like a feedback mechanism inside the company. It is like, how do you gather feedback from customers and surveys, and how do you do employee surveys? A lot of it is terrible, but what is important is you need some structure for feedback. And I think that's what's important to mimic. what works for us. So that's not what's worked for. Like what's not worked for us is taking the McKinsey framework and applying it. What's not worked for us is keeping that same startup culture of like 10 people in a garage or 3 people in a garage and try to apply it as your 100.
Yep.
What has worked for us is just having some consistent meetings and feedback mechanisms that people can deliberately ask for feedback and give feedback. I think there's some people who are very comfortable giving feedback in groups. I'm sure you've seen those loudest people, right? Like in big meetings, they would come up and say, hey, let me tell you what's wrong in this company or in this. As much of that is valuable, it kind of like doesn't allow other people to share feedback. So there's really important to have one-on-ones. So we always encourage like managers to have one-on-ones with their direct reports so that they can deliberately ask for feedback. And in our one-on-one structure, it's like, what feedback do you have for me, for the company? What should we be doing? What should we be better? And that's a way to capture feedback from the company really organically in a one-on-one setting where you're not offending anyone, and then also deliver feedback. Sometimes I want to go back and say, hey, John or Susie, you're not doing an excellent job. Like I want to tell you why and what you can improve and all the things you should be doing better. And here's why. And people receive that feedback better too. I think that works really well. And the same mechanism applies for customers. We do monthly one-on-ones with our customers and stakeholders and QBRs where we're capturing a lot of feedback. That's like the direct feedback. Now there's like the indirect feedback that can happen through surveys where you can ask for it. You know, our tool is built so that you can capture things from historical trends and understand what your customers are asking for and really predict it. But I don't think it takes away the fact that you need to be on the phones with your customers and asking for direct feedback. Same with your employees. I think that would never go away. The mechanism of just a phone conversation, and it's you set the stage that in our one-on-one, I'm going to ask for critical feedback and it's okay. I won't get offended. I'm here to just take notes and listen. I think it goes a long way. So I think that just having some structure around it has worked really well for us. What has worked for you? Let me flip it back. What have you seen in your career and what's the best way to capture feedback?
So number one, I just, before I jump into that, I love the response. I think the thing that you just really nailed, Gaurav, is like taking the initial action and getting out there and just soliciting and making an environment or making it clear that part of the expectation, whether it's with the customer or whether it's with one of your employee, is that there's going to be ongoing, consistent, regular feedback. 100% agree, brother. That's the first step right there. Got to do that. I think in my experience, there's a number of different ways that you could think about how to collect it, right? I think that, frankly, to be honest with you, I think most of the leading CX and CS SaaS solutions that are out there right now, I think that they're over-indexed, and I think that they're over-investing on this idea of collection, because frankly, collection, I think, is not as difficult as people actually believe it is. I think it's more about structuring what type of, so let's talk on the customer side first. If you have a customer set that is going to be the most geared towards providing their candid feedback to you regularly by the telephone, why are you sending them 10,000 surveys a month and wondering why you have a singular percentage point of conversion? Like that to me is just basic, like somebody missed some design thinking there where you didn't go ask your customer portfolio, hey, customer, what's the top 3 ways that we can solicit customer feedback from you? And then if you see on that sample that there's 50% want a phone call, another 30% maybe want that, maybe they want a text message, and then only 10% wants the survey. Well, maybe you just figured out that in this particular customer portfolio, phone calls is going to be one of the best ways of soliciting, collecting, and gathering some of that information. Now, I think what you talked about with structuring, this is where some of our future CX and CS leaders need to stop and take a minute to think about the consistency piece here, because similar to that of building surveys or building different types of outreach campaigns, now this is where you got to be really good at not only placing the call and gathering the information, but how are you consistently going to collect or trap or capture some of that customer feedback and information in a way that you can actually create meaningful insights, meaningful reporting, meaningful data around what they're actually asking for. So I think that it depends on your customer base is my first part of it. I think the other piece is this. I've always been a firm believer in really kind of setting those expectations at the point of sale. And I know that some of my sales friends listening to this are going to be like, come on, here you go, Adrian, throwing more to-dos at us before we close a deal and make a deal squeal. And I know that that's hard. You got to keep it as frictionless as possible. But I'm serious. I think about this, guys. In any one of the Willies Aware that you're selling today or that your business is selling today, if that conversation is had before a contract's ever signed and before the first payment is ever transferred between parties, you're setting expectations with the customer around, hey, look, on a monthly basis, we're going to try to reach out and we're going to try to collect information about our product, about our support, and about whatever, insert whatever third variable you want. That's one idea. The other thing too is just this idea of when you mentioned QBRs, for example, knowing and making part of the sale that there's going to be on a quarterly basis, we're going to actually do a 1-hour deep dive. There might even be an executive sponsor who joins the CSM on that call that day to get feedback from you about what you love, what you hate, I think that stuff is critical, man. And I think that like a lot of companies, I get it. When you're in these growth focused companies, it's really common to be completely focused on selling net new revenue, net new logos. I get it. It's because if you're not growing, you're dying, right? Let's call it what it is. It is critical. It's the most important thing. I just think a lot of companies miss what you said earlier, Gaurav, which is like the time to get excellent at doing that stuff. It's not when you're at 1,000 accounts. It's when you're at 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 accounts where you can get really, really crisp with the way that you collect, assess, and most importantly, act upon the customer feedback that you're collecting. I guess the last thing I'll say is this: don't collect customer feedback if you're not going to let people know what you're doing with it, because that's one of the easiest ways that you're going to turn people off. And that's going to be one of the easiest ways that you might start off with a high conversion rate on your surveys. But after a while, if people don't see any of the things that are coming from them taking the 2 minutes or the 3 minutes or the 4 minutes to fill out a survey, they're not going to answer it anymore. So you got to make sure that you're thinking about how you're socializing what you're doing with those findings.
Absolutely agreed. I think very well summarized, Adrian. Great job. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. See, you could tell people like you and I are thinking about this on a regular basis, my friend.
Totally.
So Gaurav, this has been fantastic. I'm super appreciative of you coming on and chatting through the 4 pillars. Before we wrap up, my friend, I want to make sure you let the CX Nation know, where can people find out more about you, sir? And where can people find out more about Involve.ai?
Yeah. So we are exactly like you said, we are at www.involve.ai. And I'm at Gaurav at Involve.ai. So feel free to email me. I'm also on LinkedIn, Gaurav Bhattacharya. People can find me. Would love to connect with some of the listeners, brainstorm ideas, be helpful to anybody. I've been in the same shoes of building these processes and frameworks, and I've struggled and made a lot of mistakes, have a lot of learnings that could apply. But also, I think there's an opportunity for me to learn what's new in the market, what's going on, and how I can continuously get better. So grateful for the opportunity, Adrian. Thank you for inviting me, and really enjoyed the conversation today.
I love it, man. It's been our absolute pleasure. And we love chatting with other customer-focused business leaders that are trying to make the world a more customer-centric place. So I appreciate all the work that you and the team are doing over at Involve.ai. It's been our pleasure today.
Thank you so much.